The story starts with a young girl. She was just another fan. Tonight, the hottest idol group in the country had everyone on their feet. And at the center of it all was Nulchin, the group's dazzling lead vocalist. Like everyone else, she couldn't take her eyes off him. One smile from Nulchin was enough to make the entire crowd scream. But unlike the others, she was having a miserable time. Meanwhile, back at school, the teachers were preparing for a new transfer student. Do-jiyoung was asked to clear an empty seat and keep an eye on the newcomer. The moment he looked at the student's record, he recognized the familiar face immediately. We have to rewind a few days. Late one evening, Rai suddenly received an excited message from her friend about a viral fancam from Dimple's latest performance. She rushed to her computer without wasting a second, eager to see what everyone was talking about. The fancam had been uploaded. Watching Nulchin smile straight into the camera made Rai wish she could see him in person. She finally made up her mind. This weekend, she was going to the pre-recording no matter what. While Rai was still on phone, someone suddenly caught her red-handed. One look at her was enough for him to guess she was planning to chase after Dimple once again. He couldn't help reminding her that the last time she went to one of their events, she came home completely exhausted and even got sick. But according to him, she clearly hadn't learned her lesson. Embarrassed that she'd been caught, Rai quickly tried to play it off, asking when he'd even walked into her room. The moment he kept teasing her, she grabbed the nearest pillow and threw it straight at him, yelling for him to get out while she was still in her pajamas. Instead of taking the hint, he laughed and teased her even more, joking that she could follow Nulchin everywhere she wanted, but the idol probably didn't even know her name. He casually told her that dinner was ready before dragging her downstairs, while Rai stubbornly resisted the entire way. All while this Miso was still on call, she asked to make sure Rai was still going to the next day, Rai and Miso finally arrived at Dimple's fan-signing event. Although Nulchin was sitting right in front of her, Rai felt surprisingly calm. Her heart wasn't racing, her hands weren't shaking, and she didn't react like the other fans at all. But then, the moment Nulchin looked at her, he smiled and casually called her by name. Rai was completely caught off guard. She had never introduced herself, so how could he possibly know who she was? Before she could even process what had happened, the fans nearby started whispering among themselves. One girl suddenly recognized Rai and excitedly pointed her out. She wasn't just any fan, she was the person behind Banchan, Dimple's biggest fan page. Her edits had gone so viral that they had introduced thousands of people to Nulchin, making her well known throughout the fandom. As everyone stared at her in amazement, Rai could feel the embarrassment taking over. Unable to handle all the attention, she grabbed Miso and rushed out of the venue without looking back. On the way home, Miso couldn't understand Rai at all. After everything that had happened, Rai admitted that she was the one running Nulchin's biggest fan page. She had spent the past year making edits, posting updates, and growing one of the largest fan communities online. Her phone, planner, and even her scrapbook were filled with Nulchin's photos, stickers, and doodles. To anyone else, she looked like the definition of a diehard fan. But despite all of that, Rai insisted she wasn't actually Nulchin's fan, and Miso had absolutely no idea how that was even possible. The next morning, Miso was still celebrating after they won tickets to Dimple's pre-recording. She happily thanked Rai, calling her lucky charm, while the rest of the class quickly found out about their plans. Some students couldn't understand why anyone would be so obsessed with celebrities, especially with exams coming up. Rai stayed quiet, but then Do-jiyoung joined the conversation and casually claimed that Dimple wasn't even that good-looking. His comment immediately caught everyone's attention. When Miso proudly revealed they had actually won tickets, Do-jiyoung couldn't believe their luck, joking that if they studied with the same dedication, they'd be top students by now. Miso quickly argued back, making the whole class laugh. But as Do-jiyoung walked away, she leaned over to Rai with a teasing smile, convinced that the class president secretly liked her because he always treated her differently from everyone else. Just before class started, Do-jiyoung asked, "Have you turned in your phone?" She could find her phone. She immediately bent down to search beneath her desk. Do-jiyoung had walked over. He joked that he was babysitting her again before helping her look. As he leaned across the desk, the distance between them disappeared, leaving Rai completely froze. Everyone in the class was looking at them. Do-jiyoung looked straight into her eyes and broke the awkward silence with a teasing smile. "So, am I better looking than your idol crush?" The unexpected question left Rai speechless. Moments later, he found her missing phone and offered to turn it in for her. But as he glanced at the wallpaper on the back of her phone, covered with Nulchin's picture, his smile faded for just a moment. It was almost as if he felt a little jealous. The moment Rai noticed Dojiang's smile disappear after seeing Nulchin on her phone, she felt strangely satisfied. That was exactly why she had started acting like Nulchin's biggest fan in the first place. If seeing another guy made Dojiang jealous, maybe, just maybe, she'd finally understand how he really felt about her. Holding her Nulchin bottle, Rai quietly smiled to herself. Maybe now I'll finally know what's in your heart, she thought. Her mind drifted back to when they were little. Rai and Dojiang had been classmates ever since elementary school. During one sports festival, Dojiang excitedly ran over and asked if she wanted to play with him. The moment Rai agreed, he happily shouted for the teachers to put her on the blue team. Since he was already assigned to the red team, he ran back to join his teammates. But before the games could even begin, another boy started complaining. He didn't want Rai on his team because everyone believed she was terrible at sports and would only make them lose. Hearing those words in front of everyone completely broke Rai's heart, and she couldn't hold back her tears. The moment Dojiang saw her crying, he immediately stepped in. Even though everyone protested that the red team couldn't afford to lose their best player, Dojiang didn't hesitate for a second. He simply told them he didn't care about winning if it meant leaving Rai to cry alone, and chose to switch to the blue team just to stay by her side. Rai looked at him shocked. Then Dojiang turned and looked back at her. Both of their eyes met. That was the moment Rai fell for him. They both went to play and time passed by and they grew up playing basketball. Rai was in love with him but didn't know how Dojiang felt about her. She came back to reality when someone called her name. When she looked up, it was Nulchin. There were too many students gathered around the class to see Nulchin. All the class was shocked to see the idol as a transfer student in their class. Then the teacher came to the class desk to introduce Nulchin as the new transfer student. Nulchin was standing right beside the teacher. He whispered something in the teacher's ear. Then the teacher said, Rai Kim, as you are a fan of Nulchin, you must help him to settle in. He told Nulchin to sit with Rai. Rai was losing it because her fake crush and real crush were both in this class. The rest of the class started to ask for Nulchin's autograph and talk to him. All were very happy to meet a celebrity in person. Everyone immediately crowded around Nulchin, asking if he could bring them signed albums. With a smile, he promised he'd do his best. Meanwhile, Rai was quietly freaking out. If everyone found out Nulchin wasn't actually her real crush, the lie she'd been hiding for so long would completely fall apart. Then she remembered something Miso had told her once. If you ever meet your idol in person, respect their privacy. Don't act like you already know them. So Rai quickly decided to pretend they were complete strangers. That way, no one would suspect anything. Just as she thought she'd pulled it off, Nulchin suddenly turned to her and asked if she'd like a signed album too. Caught off guard, Rai awkwardly replied, "Don't bother." Hearing that, Nulchin smiled and said, "I guess you're not as big a fan as I thought." Rai's heart instantly dropped. She was terrified he'd exposed the truth in front of the entire class. In a complete panic, she started pulling out everything she owned with his face on it, her bottle, wallet, stickers, scrapbook, and every piece of merchandise she had, frantically trying to prove she really was his biggest fan. Then she quickly explained that she'd only refused because she already had one of his signed albums. Watching her desperately defend herself, Nulchin couldn't help laughing. With a warm smile, he simply looked at her and said, "You're funny." As the day went on, Nulchin gradually started relying on Rai. First, he casually asked her to write the class notes for him since his hands were hurting. A little later, Nulchin mentioned he was thirsty. Rai immediately got up to bring him some water, but just as she returned, he smiled and said he was craving a Coke instead. Not wanting to disappoint him, Rai headed back out to find one, but when she finally came back with the drink, she froze. Several girls had already surrounded Nulchin, bringing him snacks, lunch, and even Coke before she could. Laughing and chatting with them, Nulchin looked completely at ease. Before long, Nulchin had already become the most popular student in the entire school. She sat down next to him in cafeteria and quietly sipped the Coke she'd gone out of her way to get for him. Deep down, she couldn't help complaining to herself. He's so lazy, moody, and treats me like his personal assistant, yet somehow, he always managed to get away with it thanks to that charming smile. When Rai looked up, she noticed Dojiang sitting across the cafeteria. The moment he saw Nulchin and Rai eating together, his expression noticeably darkened. He didn't say a single word, but the jealousy on his face was impossible to miss. By the time school finally ended, Rai was completely drained. It felt like the longest day of her life, and she was practically dragging herself toward the school gate. That's when Miso suddenly ran over and hugged her, completely jealous that Rai got to spend the entire day sitting next to Nulchin. Dojiang happened to overhear the conversation and glanced at Rai before asking why she didn't seem happy about it. Rai immediately panicked. Wait, is he already starting to suspect something? She thought. But before she could come up with an excuse, someone suddenly called out her name from behind, making everyone turn around. It was Nulchin. He walked straight toward her, leaving everyone around them completely stunned. Rai's heart nearly stopped when he admitted there was something he'd been wanting to ask her. Trying to stay calm, she listened as Nulchin explained that he was still new to the school and didn't know his way around yet. Then, with a bright smile, he asked if he could have her phone number. Rai's mind instantly went blank. Instead of giving a normal answer, she babbled something awkwardly. Somehow, she managed to tell him he could contact her anytime. But before the conversation could continue, Dojiang suddenly stepped between them. Seeing how flustered Rai looked, he coldly told Nulchin to back off because she was obviously uncomfortable. Nulchin looked at him in confusion and simply asked, "Who are you?" Then, before anyone could react, Dojiang answered without the slightest hesitation, "I'm Rai's